Hi, I'm BECMI Berserker and welcome back to my channel. Just a quick video today to cut through all the OGL crap and attempt to drive some traffic towards old school D&D. I want to tell you about the 3 things that drove me away from 5e and back into the loving arms of old school D&D, specifically the BECMI edition of the game. If you don't know what that is, please follow the link I'm putting up on the screen now. So let's get into the 3 things that drove me back to old school D&D. Now, I understand that old school has its issues too, but it didn't have the benefit of decades of playtesting behind it, conducted by millions of players. I mean, it's hard to make an argument against ascending armor class these days. But when returning to old school, I know it's going to have these foibles. That's the point, it's old school. So what are the 3 things that I have felt uncomfortable with in 5e? The 3 things that have built up in me over the past few years and caused me to really grind my teeth in frustration. Well, the first one is natural healing on a long or short rest. The mechanic has driven me crazy ever since I've heard of its use in 4e, and I really wish it never leaked into 5th edition. 4e was quite obviously a tabletop version of how a computer game might run D&D, and the heal on rest mechanic was an import from RPG video games such as Neverwinter Nights and Warcraft. I totally understand it in that context, as who would want to have less health than the others online when trying to go up against pixelated dragons? The thing is, the video game experience did away with time as a concept to worry about, replacing it with short intervals of pausing your play when no enemies were around, so that you can regenerate your hit points. Although this took time, it was likely to be around 30 seconds compared to a number of days in old school D&D, which your enemies might be using to take advantage of if you're back in town resting. The short and long rest mechanic in 5th edition D&D was an adaptation of this methodology, although I appreciate it costs 1 or 8 hours of game time. However, this mechanic has completely altered how players approach the game. Clerics no longer heal before rest because the rest heals everyone anyway. There's little or no decision making required in terms of who should be healed and what limited resources are available and who can wait. I once ran a game where the party was very badly injured after an epic battle, and instead of healing each other they decided to long rest, because that moved them from 10 hit points to 100 hit points with no apparent cost. What I think is worse is if they had decided to short rest, as they were 10th level and could have averaged 40 to 50 hit points of healing just for sitting on their asses for an hour. No first aid required. I mean, you don't even need the medicine skill. Who actually uses the medicine skill? And that's the crux of my issue with this. It has no basis in realism. Now, I know some of you out there might be saying, but it's fantasy, so it's not real. But that's a load of crap. You may as well say, let's not have injury at all. I mean, it's just fantasy, right? Now, I know there are plenty of house rulings out there in terms of how to deal with resting exploitation, but I think that just serves to highlight there is an issue. DMs are having to be conscious of this being potentially exploited, and God forbid you have a player who wants to fight you on it. No, for me the old school approach of 1 hit point per day and 3 on a day of full bed rest makes much more sense. It's much more based in realism. Well, putting aside that somebody probably had a sword put through them. And it gives healing magic much more value. Furthermore, it raises the value of hit points themselves, making players think of abstract and conniving ways to win their battles, rather than being too quick to roll initiative and depend on an easily replaceable hit point pool. And that's number 1. And quite obviously, number 2 is going to be death saves. Now, I know lots of people like the death save mechanic. I did myself when running early 5e games, as it offered a bit of excitement in terms of whether someone could be saved from the other side of the battlefield. But this enthusiasm quickly faded. It's well documented how infrequent it is for characters to get killed in 5e compared to earlier editions, and that's just one part of it. But for me, it's just how goofy the mechanic is in practice. I've had numerous sessions where characters go down only to get healed and pop up as if nothing has happened. You can be on 1 hit point, take 20 damage, which still reduces your hit points to 0, fall prone, get 1 hit point of healing, and leap up to attack something nearby. In rules as written, there's no lapse or incoherence in coming back from the brink. You're just up and at 'em, and this drives me nuts. Spells like Healing Word or abilities like the druid's Unicorn Spirit were able to exploit this repetitively. It got so bad my monsters began attacking player characters when they were down. I mean, they kept seeing them pop up, right? And for that, I was called all sorts. I'm not even a fan of the negative hit points from earlier editions actually. I think 0 should mean death. The only reason this became an issue anyway was DMs and players trying to save campaigns because they'd become overly dependent on certain characters and needed them to become more resilient. This is not, in my opinion, a sustainable position if you want to keep the game dangerous and interesting with the jeopardy it deserves. Okay, so that was number 2. The final one is spell mechanics, or more specifically, how spells have become overly concerned with balance and combat tactics. You see, I think magic is one of those things where balance should actually be lost. Magic is the mechanic that bends or breaks the rules. There is some game control of this mechanic through the use of spell levels. I mean, there has to be some scaling of magic's power. But ultimately, magic makes things possible that otherwise wouldn't be possible in the physical world. In 5e, the obsession with balance has reduced much of its application to the combat round, and therefore it has become extremely tactical and much less strategic. For instance, hold person only lasts up to 1 minute, compared to 1.5 hours in old school, which makes it a far more useful spell. Can you imagine the conversation in 5e Wizard College when they invented hold person? Sir, I've just invented a new spell. Really? What does it do? It paralyses people, sir. Amazing. That sounds extremely useful. For how long? A minute, sir. A minute? Well, possibly, sir, but at least 6 seconds. 6 seconds? Hopefully you get my point. The number of spells with just a minute's duration and the roll each round for save mechanic is really awful, and a clear indication that the focus of the game turns inward towards combat encounters rather than broader applications. Bizarrely, this reduction in spell duration causes a reduction in effectiveness and actually ends up lengthening combat. Let's take the whole person example again. It sounds like the perfect spell for a kidnapping. But in 5e, as soon as it's cast, you potentially have only 6 seconds to grab the victim and restrain them before they become able to react. That's a pretty rubbish spell, in my opinion. Another aspect of spell mechanics in 5e that's put me off is the concentration mechanic. Now, on the surface this seems like a great mechanic. I actually did like it to begin with, but far too many spells fall under this category, and many of them suffer from the up to a minute duration factor. Again, demonstrating the focus on tactical and lengthy encounters rather than using resources to end the combat quickly, which is how you would want things in a real combat situation. Another spell that drives me nuts for being concentration is Fly. I mean, a wizard's first thought should be effectiveness without risk. But once a 5e wizard is in the air, they can no longer use any other concentration spells, which is a fair few of them. The intent to keep things balanced here is quite transparent. That is, if a wizard is going to be in the air picking people off, it might not seem fair. But what's fair in combat? If players expect wizards to be able to do that, they'll be less likely to take their chances with them. That makes for more clever play than just charging them. And that's another reason I prefer old school spells over 5e. You can be a 20th level fighter in old school BECMI, but you still give pause if going up against a magic user of much lesser power. You might have good saving throws, but there's a chance that the whole person spell is going to get you, leaving you completely vulnerable. Or worse, you might have to save or die if they have a disintegrate or similar. Sound harsh? Let me put it this way. If a kid has a gun and you're a seasoned veteran, you're still taking your life in your hands trying to tackle them. That's where old school demands you using your mind ahead of what's on your character sheet. Spells in old school are feared and demand respect. In 5e, they're just collateral and will probably be over in 6 seconds. So those are my top 3 reasons for turning my back on 5e. Obviously, I've had more to say on spells than the others, which is why I saved it till last. But what are your top 3 gripes with 5e or other modern D&D systems that would get you playing old school? It would be really interesting to know. Please put them in the comments. Thank you again for your support. Please like and subscribe to my channel to drive the old school traffic on YouTube, or even consider buying me a coffee to support me further as I aim to release at least 1 video a week. Also, please consider watching my BECMI Dungeons & Dragons videos to learn more about the edition that is the most complete version of the game ever. I'm BECMI Berserker, and I hope to see you back here very soon.